Alright, so finally, some confrontation. So in this chapter, we finally make it to Viridian Forest. We start off more or less with Blue. He's just kind of taking care of some Pokemon, and he brushes off a Venomoth because it's just, oh, whatever, a Venomoth, which are super easy to find in Viridian Forest. But he's just being his usual kind of a jerk self. And then we jump back to Red, who also has made it to Viridian Forest, who's looking for a Caterpie and having a hard time finding the Pokemon, I guess. Hears something rustling in a bush, sends his Poliwhirl out to go get it, and when he finally finds Poliwhirl, it's all beaten up because Blue basically thought it was a wild Poliwhirl, because again, it would be in Viridian Forest, I guess. Red and Blue kind of have some kind of butt heads, because Red's not super happy that Blue beat up his Pokemon, and rightfully so, though it's not entirely Blue's fault, I guess. Basically, they get into an argument. Red tries to beat up Blue by throwing a punch, which honestly is super interesting because, again, I keep referencing other mediums of Pokemon, but like you don't see violent actions by the trainers very, very often anyways. Sometimes you do, but you don't see it very often. So it's really interesting to see like trainer trying to get into a fight physically with another trainer rather than just, oh, we're gonna have a Pokemon battle. So that's super interesting. Again, we get some more character growth. We get to see Red being a kind person again and being really smart. He sees something that even Blue, who is supposed to be a bit more well-traveled and well-trained as a trainer, he doesn't see it. So basically, for the namesake of the chapter, Kangaskhan, a Kangaskhan shows up right as they're arguing. And apparently this is the Pokemon that Blue's been going after, or at least trying to find, and he starts going at it. He sends his Charmander to attack the Kangaskhan. The Kangaskhan's getting kind of its butt handed to him, and something's not quite right, though. And Red sees that. Blue doesn't, because he's so out there trying. He wants to catch that Kangaskhan. He doesn't care what gets in his way. He's gonna keep going for that Kangaskhan. Red doesn't want to have any of that, so he forces Blue to stop. And it turns out that the Kangaskhan wasn't fighting back because it had a sick baby in its pouch. And somehow Red noticed this, because apparently he's really in tune with Pokemon, and it's like, that's a very interesting, it's super cool to see Red be, he's a knucklehead, but like when it comes to Pokemon, he has kind of a sixth sense where he has this intuition that like he knows something when he sees it, and it might not be super obvious to most people, but to Red it's clear as day. So he finds this sick Kangaskhan baby in the pouch, and he has like an antidote or something like that, and cures the baby. And basically Blue is not super happy that he's not super happy that the Kangaskhan is gonna get away, but he understands, and he is just kind of he's not happy, but he understands. He doesn't want to like deal with that. And then at the end of the chapter, I think Professor Oak was following them, but like not saying anything, because at the end of the chapter, Kangaskhan leaves, and Red and Blue kind of have their like, we're rivals now. You have a Pokedex, I have a Pokedex. I don't like you, you don't like me kind of thing. And they kind of separate. And then you see Professor Oak in the background, just kind of like, my grandson and my new protege are having a newfound rivalry. I'm so happy about this. And it's just some like weird, like, what is he following them? Why is he even there to begin with? Is this maybe Professor Oak is always following you, and that's why whenever you try to get on a bike in a building, he says, "Nuh-uh, no. Professor Oak says you can't ride a bike in a building for some reason." So maybe he's following you? But it's really goofy. Like, it's interesting to see, though. Like, this wasn't a super serious chapter, but it's more character development showing that, like, well, yeah, Blue and Red are very similar in a sense. They're both cocky. They both think they know everything. But when it comes to Pokemon, Blue is a bit more cold, and that's something that we see very often in Rivals, where it's just they're very calculated, they're very smart, but when it comes to Pokemon, they're a little bit more. They're not as in tune. They just see them maybe not as tools per se, but they see them as a means to an end rather than, oh, here is a living being that are my friends. And that's where Red deviates, and he's just like, he's an idiot, he's super full of himself, but when it comes to Pokemon, he's very, very invested as far as how they feel and what they're like and where their mindset's at. So that's super interesting to see. Basically, this chapter was actually pretty quick in a general sense. It basically didn't cover a whole lot as far as ground, because it was all set in one place and you didn't meet anybody new per se. But you did get to see a lot of how Red and Blue interact with each other. In the first chapter, you saw very briefly, but it was kind of a passing moment. The main point of the chapter wasn't how they interact, and in this, you really get to see how they interact and how different they are, even though they're very similar as well. I think that's an interesting dynamic between the two of them that you don't really get to see in other forms of them, because in other forms it's like, technically, I guess in the anime, Ash and Gary are like complete opposites. They're both kind of like they're very similar in a way, but they're not really. They're very different. For various reasons. In the game, obviously, your character is stoic and doesn't really say a whole lot, if anything at all. So you don't really you don't know what your character is like. Your character is basically just you, and then Gary or Blue rather, is kind of an asshole. But in this, you get to see how they really interact and how different, but at the same time, how similar they are. I just kind of repeating myself here, though. This is kind of a quick review, I guess, in a sense, because I don't really have a whole lot to say other than that. It's just it's an interesting dynamic. Again, at the beginning of the chapter, you get to see Red carrying his Pokemon with him. Again, I mentioned this in the last review. The whole Pokeball thing, where they can see outside of their Pokeballs, it really adds a connection to the trainer and their Pokemon, as opposed to just, oh, they're in my bag, I'll get them when I need them. It's more like they're traveling together, and it's a journey for all of them together, rather than just, oh, the trainer's toting around some monsters in his bag. I think that's really cool, and they keep focusing on how Red is talking to his Pokemon in their Pokeballs, and then you see basically Red, or Blue rather, who's just kind of like, whatever. But yeah, they're really honing in on how much of a connection that Blue has with Pokemon that are his own, and that are not even, he barely even saw that Kangaskhan, and immediately knew that there was something wrong in the midst of the battle between Blue and this Kangaskhan. So there's a lot more going on in Red's mind. He's a little bit rash, but like when it comes to Pokemon, he really cares so much, and that's really cool. And I'd like to see a little bit more character development on Blue's side, because right now he's just his typical I'm super great, whatever loser kind of shticks. But I'd like to see some connection go on between them. Maybe they realize that they're not so different, and that maybe Blue has kind of a heart of gold, even though he doesn't show it very often. But yeah, I mean those are my thoughts on this chapter. I found it cool, even though it was kind of a relatively short chapter to some degree. Let me know what you guys thought of this chapter. What do you think of Red and Blue's dynamics? Do you like the idea that kind of Red has this weird like sixth sense about Pokemon, that he can feel how they feel to some degree, and he kind of knows when something's off. And leave a like if you enjoyed this. Let me know what you guys think of the whole chapter, and remember to subscribe so that you can keep up with my future videos. I will see you guys in another video. Bye bye.